Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto anime review. This one's going to be for episode 249. So, interesting episode where they, in summary I suppose, tried to add a lot of shades of grey, layers of nuance to the situation between basically the Miss and the Fanado, our hero characters and the Fanado. Basically centered around Boruto beginning to realize that simply you killed this person I care about, so I have to kill you, isn't always the obvious solution, that there's more to it than that. And him really being hit hard by two major reveals that impact previous scenes and add obviously the nuance I was talking about. So the first one is that he finds out that Funamushi has a son. We do get, I suppose, confirmation that I suppose Funamushi died off screen because they're talking about avenging him. That was kind of weird and unclear about the whole situation, but I guess he just dies off screen. So Funamushi has a son who wants to kill Boruto because of what happened. So straight away, Boruto being the target of the same hatred and want for revenge that Boruto has towards Funamushi and so on, hits him hard. Then at the end of the episode, we get the reveal from the Fanado guy they have captured that he reveals that, oh, you critically injured Lady Seiran, and her younger brother, Lord Ikada, is upset. So he gets that reveal that, oh, the other person I helped to quote-unquote kill, Seiran, that was actually my friend Ikada's sister. So he's been hit very hard by these things, and a lot of the other characters are basically kind of talking to Boruto about these type of situations. And the question comes up of is this exactly the time to have this conversation? The likes of Kawaki seems to be like, no, this is war, you just have to kind of grow up and move on. And I think to some degree Boruto needs that kind of harsh words spoken to him about this. It's good that he's considering these things, and that fundamentally, if there's any hope for this conflict to be resolved, that the killing probably does need to stop. The one for revenge on both sides, it does need to stop, and maybe there is hope for some sort of a more peaceful resolution to this. Now, I think this is what this is doing, is it is maybe taking the end of this arc from just big fights against the Fanado, they're all defeated, Fanado are gone for good, into more being that maybe we only get select fights against Fanado members, the ones who are really out for blood, out for violence. So I'm assuming Amari will be one of the characters who ends up getting taken out, and maybe his son, or maybe Seiren actually ends up surviving, and Ikada are the ones who can maybe guide the Fanado down a different, more peaceful path. And the Mist can be aware that some of what they have issues with are valid with the Fanado, and come to a more peaceful solution once all the truly, violent, terrible aspects of their organization is taken out. Again, the fact that a lot of that stuff was introduced right at the start of the arc, which is getting to be quite a bit ago. They definitely need to re-bring up what the Fanado are actually about, because again, you had that whole thing about the ocean machine that was calming down the raging ocean, the waves, and that being something that the Fanado oppose. That sort of stuff feels a little bit like, okay, you need to come back to that if that's indeed the direction that we're heading in. But the main thing that this episode was about was putting Boruto in this sort of heightened state where he's thinking about these things and can't really get into the battles because he's so lost in thought about sort of consequences, and if I choose to act against this person, what if this causes another cycle of revenge, and kind of realizing that what will snap him out of that. Now, he's obviously going to, I guess, meet Ikada, and this will come out. We'll see how Ikada reacts to all of this. Um, it's a tricky one because they've done, I think, an okay job at this, but it also feels like it's maybe a little bit like last minute in a way, because in this episode you suddenly have to introduce, oh yeah, Funamushi had a son, and he also spared Denki and Iwabe, because he showed some concern for the idea that they were just out there to get food for the kids. And so, oh, he cares about children, so that's an extra layer to things overall. Now, you obviously, it's meant to be purposefully nuanced, that the character who viciously kills Hebichigo and Kagura also has good parts to him. He's not just an out and out villain. Like, that's fine, that's understandable. But it's happening like quite bluntly here. Similarly, I suppose with Sarda, you also had a little bit of this dynamic where she has to be the one to argue for the idea of giving medical aid to an enemy soldier who can't fight back, and that the village kind of want him to be taken out. A lot of the other characters kind of do as well. So you end with this situation where there's like a few characters on each side of this ultimately. Boruto, Iwabe, and Denki seem to be the ones who are more like aware of this, because Boruto is the one who directly, I suppose, interacts most heavily with the I hate yous type situation. And then Iwabe and Denki are both alive because they saw a little bit of a different side of Funamushi. Whereas Metal is actually kind of still wants revenge because he's upset about what happened to Hebichigo. Buntan is more like Kawaki in that they're just like, kind of, this is war, this is what needs to be done. There's no need for sort of nuanced discussion over this because we know what needs to be done. There was a kind of interesting conversation between Kawaki and Mitsuki about this. It was more about how they talk with Boruto, and Mitsuki noting that, like, oh, I like how, in a way, like, blunt you can be with Boruto and just immediately, like, clash with him if you had to without worrying about, like, the consequences of that. But, and he's like, oh, Mitsuki says, like, I don't communicate well with other people, but Kawaki actually says, no, you just do it in your own way, and kind of Mitsuki's a little lost in thought about that. So I'm not really sure what they were necessarily going for there, but kind of interesting because it is one of the more subtle dynamics in the arc, but they have done a little bit of, like, Mitsuki's interested in Kawaki and just what their dynamic actually is. Similarly, a more subtle thing that I thought was actually nicely done was Kyoto interacting with basically Kagura's friends, the two main sort of villagers that we have of the arc. They basically offer him the idea of, like, do you want to stay in the village? And he's taken aback by this and actually seems to want to go for it. And it feels like if he survives the arc, I can definitely see that maybe being the direction that they have Kyoto go in as a character, where maybe his arc and his want to make amends with Kagura and, you know, the legacy of Kagura live on. He will be the one to protect, you know, the village that meant so much to Kagura. Because, again, I think Buntan is maybe destined for more of a bigger arc to fully take on a lot of the arc that Kagura was maybe about to go on. So it leaves Kyoto a little bit out in the open, but that seems like the perfect, I think, position for the character. And he does decide to ultimately not go for it here, but the arc is still ongoing. He wasn't going to abandon things when the fights are still about to take place. In terms of, like, I suppose, animation and stuff like that, surprisingly, the little action sequence between, like, Boruto, Funamushi's son, and the kind of guard for Funamushi's son was arguably one of the better animated things in, like, that we've seen in the arc in a while. But it's just a little bit random the way things are going at the moment with that. But anyway, I like the idea of introducing the shades of grey, the nuance to this discussion of, like, end the cycle of hatred. I'm not sure if it's necessarily being executed incredibly well here, just because I feel like if this is what you're going for, you maybe should have introduced it a bit earlier on. but I like it. It does add some emotion, some depth to the arc. I'm just not really sure necessarily what the idea is. Um, because they played with this obviously in the Pain arc with Naruto, and it worked because ultimately Naruto didn't have a solution to it. And then the end result is that he's eventually able to convince Pain to put faith in me that someday, somehow, I can find a solution to this and, make it so that this cycle of hatred doesn't exist. What exact position is Boruto eventually going to get into where it resolves his conflict over what's going on here? Because it feels like Boruto is currently in a position where he kind of can't really bring himself to fight against the Fanato because of the potential consequences. And especially now knowing that he's likely to go up against Ikada, he'll be even less likely to fight. So what will get him back on track? And this is where I may be wondering, does Mitsuki talk to Boruto, and that actually is what gets through to him, because they did set up the idea of Kawaki and Mitsuki both have their own unique ways of talking to him. I'm not sure. I like it, but I'm a little unsure about the direction of where this might lead things to go. But that's what the next episode, I suppose, is for. Though it does look like it's going to be more Fanato focused on what they are up to. And I'm hoping that the next episode, what it does by focusing on the villains a little bit more, is that it maybe introduces, on the other side of things, the nuances we were talking about here. That maybe Amari is more just out for blood against the Mist, whereas maybe his son actually more has the ideals of the Fanato in mind. Because we've already had a little bit of that discussion about the son wants to do things more tactically. Amari just wants to fight, I guess. So he might actually be a leader who will listen and deal with the Mist Village going forward. But there's a long way to go, I think, before we necessarily get there. But I think they should move the progress on a little bit so we can get going. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.